Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss about an important disease in neurology called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And this amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is a type of motor neuron disease. As we have already know that we have about 6 in number of motor neuron diseases actually. So this amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is the number one, and that which is the most common actually and the most important disease among the amyotrophic among the motor neuron diseases actually. So let us dive into the topic. So, but before we dive into the topic, let us talk about what a upper motor neuron and then lower motor neuron is actually. This upper motor neuron, as we are seeing it in this color, actually they are the neurons that they arise from the cerebral cortex, from the motor cortex actually. That's primary motor cortex. This they are the one that arises from the cerebral cortex and then down to the either to make a synapse with a lower motor neuron in the brainstem, or they descend down to the spinal cord and then make the synapse with the lower motor neuron in the spinal cord. So this is an example of lower motor neuron. As we have already know that the lower motor neuron, it is the one that directly has an association with the muscle it innervate or the gland, while upper motor neuron, it has direct association with the cerebral cortex actually. So they make a synapse in the spinal cord. If it is cranial nerve, so the upper motor neuron make a synapse with the lower motor neuron in the cranial in the brainstem, right? So that is it. So now let us dive into the topic. So amyotrophic lateral sclerosis actually by definition is a kind of neurodegenerative disease, neurodegenerative disease that actually that lead to damage of both upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron. This is very classical actually. We have to really know this because there are some actually types of motor neuron disease that affect only upper motor neuron and some affect only lower motor neuron. But this amyotrophic lateral sclerosis affect both. That's upper motor neuron and then lower motor neuron actually. So that is it. Then leading to muscle weakness. Leading to muscle weakness. That is it. So that is it. Then let us see etiology. What will cause this degeneration of this upper and lower motor neuron actually? So the etiology or the causative agent is actually unknown. So there is no definite cause that is identified yet. So it's idiopathic in majority of the cases, but there are some genes actually or some mutations that are associated with this disease. For example, mutation in superoxide dismutase 1, that is SOD1 gene. Sometimes they set environmental factors like exposure of one to like pesticides exposure, organophosphate exposure, and organophosphate. All these chemicals are also associated, but not the definitive cause of this amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Just they put the person at risk of developing this disease actually, organophosphate poison. So that is it. So now let us see the symptoms, right? The symptoms of this disease, because we said that upper motor neuron and then lower motor neuron disease, lower motor neurons are actually affected both, right? So let us see the symptoms. So the symptoms generally are going to be weakness of the muscles that are innervated by that particular nerves that get damaged, right? So the signs and symptoms. And we have to really know that this upper motor neuron that are damaged and then the lower motor neuron, they are the neurons that are actually they are going to be actually going to give a kind of nerve in the cranial nerves, either a cranial nerve or a spinal nerve, right? So it may be either a cranial nerve problem or a kind of spinal nerve problem. So not necessarily to be only cranial nerve or spinal nerve, but both are affected. So since the cranial nerves are going to be affected, as I have said earlier, so definitely the person will be having a kind of trouble with what, with dysphagia, because in the cranial nerves, among the cranial nerves, we have the nerves that control swallowing, control a kind of speech, right? So that is it. So the person will be having a kind of difficulty in speaking. That is called dysarthria, difficulty in speaking. So also he will have a difficulty in swallowing called dysphagia, actually dysphagia. And also the person will have a problem with handling saliva, actually he will be drooling. So the person will be having a kind of drooling. All these are symptoms that are associated with what, with cranial nerve problem. But we have to really know that patient with ALS, the extraocular muscles actually are okay, are normal, so they are not affected. So that is it. And then since there is a kind of problem with handling saliva, then definitely the patient will kind of aspirate, right? He have a problem, risk of aspiration, so there will be a kind of aspiration leading to pneumonia, right? So that is it. Then now we have another symptoms, actually. Since the brainstem is affected, we have a kind of syndrome called pseudobulba syndrome. Pseudobulba affect syndrome. So the patient is said to have this particular syndrome when he has problem in his brainstem is when the patient is having a kind of crying and laughing inappropriately. He may laugh in an instance that it is don't require to laugh, and he may kind of sometimes cry in an instances or in a circumstance that he's not supposed to cry. So having a kind of crying and then laughing inappropriately. This is also another important symptom of and sign of this ALS, actually. So that is it. Then we have another kind of symptom, which is which is not actually typically symptoms, but sign, actually. You as a physician, you will see that those kind of sign, actually. Since the patient have lower motor neuron involvement, then definitely the patient in the muscle group that are affected, the muscles will going to show a kind of fasciculation, because fasciculations a kind of atrophy and then weakness, that is decrease in muscle strength. All these, they are due to what, due to lower motor neuron problem. And then in the same muscle group, the patient will kind to show the muscle will going to show a kind of symptom of or sign of upper motor neuron damage. For example, Babinski sign. Babin Babinski's Babinski sign. So this Babinski sign is a classical sign of upper motor neuron damage. So the patient will kind to have a kind of this Babinski sign, actually, which is typical of upper motor neuron. And then we have another sign of upper motor neuron damage called stiffness of the muscle. So in the muscle group that are affected, the patient will have the same muscle group that are affected. The patient will going to have fasciculation atrophy and weakness, which is sign of lower motor neuron damage. And then in the same muscle group, we're going to have a kind of stiffness. And then when you carry out a kind of Babinski sign, Babinski test, then the patient will show a kind of positive Babinski sign, actually. So that is positive Babinski sign. So that is it. And then we have to really know that the respiratory muscles are going to be affected, right? So there will going to be a kind of respiratory failure. Respiratory problem. So that is it. So now let us see diagnosis. How will we, or how can we diagnose the patient with ALS? So based on symptoms, when we are suspecting ALS, that is diagnosis, based on symptoms and symptoms actually of the patient, then we will be suspecting ALS, actually. So for us to confirm ALS, we have to do a kind of physical examination. That is physical neurological examination, right? In ALS, we have to really know that sensory fibers are okay. Sensory fibers are okay, no problem with them. But there will be a kind of sign of what? Lower motor neuron and then upper motor neuron damage. So as I have already mentioned, so signs of what? Upper motor neuron damage, for example, a kind of stiffness. So and also what? Lower motor neuron damage also in the same muscle groups. For example, a kind of fasciculation, atrophy, and then that is muscle wasting, right? And then weakness. So that is it. Then there is a kind of most definite or most accurate confirmatory test. Is actually most accurate confirmatory test for this is a kind of EMG, electromyogram. So that is it. Then treatment. Treatment, we have to really give a kind of drug called riluzole, which is a kind of glutamate receptor antagonist. Glutamate receptor antagonist. So that is it. So thank you very much.